welcome to this week's video. This week I decided it would be fun to show off the colouring of the front page of the Plant Witch colouring book. That's a lot of words in one sentence. Essentially, I wanted to show off the colouring that I did for the front of the book and maybe give some tips on how to use alcohol markers. But for those who don't know, earlier this year I produced a colouring book and the theme for the colouring book was Plant Witch. Now, colouring books tend to be one of my highly requested things. I never actually thought that people would be interested in colouring my line art. So after a bit of debate, a little bit of trial and error, I decided to produce my colouring book. Now, you may have seen some of these line works either on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, or you may have seen me do one or two of these pieces up on this channel. But anyway, I decided that I really wanted to have the theme Plant Witch, and the whole idea is it's plant witches with their familiars. You'll notice that some have different types of animals, that they're all different types of genders, some are non-binary, some are identify male, some identify female. And I just really wanted this to be a fun colouring book with lots of different ideas. So the piece I'm actually colouring is this Cactus Witch. Now, I am using alcohol markers here. I'm using my Winsor & Newton / Electroset Pro markers. They are the same brand. I've used these for many years. This is like the alcohol marker that I absolutely love. What I really like about these alcohol markers is they are bright, their colour lays down absolutely beautifully, and it is kind of like the marker that I cannot live without. So when it comes to colouring markers, I always suggest, because depending on what kind of paper you use is depending on how much the marker is going to bleed. Now, the paper I'm using here for this particular piece that I did the line work on is actually mixed media paper. It's Cancer mixed media paper, and the paper that the colouring book is made on is recycled paper, which takes to markers quite well. Now, if you are using markers, the trick is when you are layering down massive areas of colour to do small circles instead of using the marker in big streaky lines. When you're using small circles, yes, when you layer over certain aspects and certain sections, you will end up going over the colour and colour again and again. But this is the best way to achieve the smoothest layout. You'll notice here as well, I'm using a lot of cool tones for the shading. This is because with this piece in particular, I knew I wanted the warmest tones to be the skin tone, the skirt, and as well as the certain aspects of like the foreground. So I'm using very cool tones here. You'll notice I'm using blue and purple for shading. This is because it offsets really nice with green and creates this really beautiful cool tone. If you want to create a warmer tone with green, you can use some warmer toned greens and some warmer toned purples to really push that aspect. But I really like the idea of a cool colour, especially when it comes to cacti. If you want your lighter tones to be warmer, I'd suggest using like a brighter yellow. This will really help make that green area pop. So basically here what I'm just doing is I'm layering down my flat surface. Now, I tend to, with markers, I'll lay down my flats first and then I'll build up my shade afterwards. I sometimes get a little bit overexcited and I'll like start shading areas, and this is because I'm like, I can't see a piece until it like pops out at me massively. But if you are using alcohol markers, my suggestion always is, if you don't want it to bleed through, say if you're using this in a sketchbook and with alcohol markers, put a piece of paper underneath your paper so that if it bleeds through the page, then it doesn't bleed through onto the following page of the sketchbook. This is just because alcohol markers, they actually behave best on a waxy style paper, and this is like marker paper. This is because this paper has been specifically treated to deal with markers. Now, personally, I really do not like marker paper. My reasoning for this is I find the paper very flimsy. It's not particularly great. With markers, you ideally want a smooth surface because this smooth surface helps the markers to lay on nicely. Before I actually used mixed media paper, I used to use just plain white card, and this was a good substitute for Bristol board. Now, Bristol board is fantastic for markers as well, but it can be fairly expensive. So if you are looking at using markers and you just want to try it out and see whether or not it's for you, I actually do suggest using white card. Now, certain different types of paper are going to soak up your markers much quicker. For example, if you use watercolor paper and you are using markers on top of it, that's obviously going to soak up your markers much quicker, because that paper is built in to take water, it's built in to take that texture, that medium, so it will suck up your markers much quicker. Now I do often get asked the question, well, don't your markers run out very quickly? Actually, no. I've had a lot of these markers for a fair few years, and if you've been following my channel for quite a while, you'll notice I use alcohol markers a lot. In fact, I haven't had to top up my marker collection in a year and a half now. I've not had to buy any markers. I tend to wait until sales are on with these markers in particular, because markers can be fairly expensive, but there are some really good cheap alternative to alcohol markers. If you're ever unsure, there are hundreds of reviews out there. I myself have done a fair few reviews on other substitutes for alcohol markers. If you are interested in checking those out, I'll leave a link down below. Another good alternative to alcohol markers, if you are, say, you're not confident with them in any way, shape or form, watercolours tends to be another favourite medium of mine, although I will say with watercolours you have to make sure you've got the specific paper. Now the paper that I've chosen in particular for the colouring book that I've used, it's good for alcohol markers and it's good for pencil crayons. Watercolours, it's going to depend on how much you're going to layer it. If you're going to layer it with a lot of water, yes, it is going to have issues. Watercolour paper is best for watercolors. I cannot stress that enough, because it is built for watercolors. So if you, I am looking at in the future maybe doing the doing a colouring book, but it has watercolor paper for those who would love watercolors. I don't know, is a colouring book something that you are interested in? Is it something that you can see? Would you like me to do digital versions of this so you could download them yourselves and use your own paper? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if I did another colouring book, what should the theme be? And maybe it should be like dragons or like fantasy, I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Or maybe we should do a Plant Witch sequel book. That should be fun. People are being noisy outside. Anyway, I think what is really fun about doing a colouring book, in particular for me, was being able to design all the different types of witches. I call them witches in general because I feel like witches and wizards in my world, they are very different. Wizards in my world, it's witches and wizards is, for me, in my world, is just a very general term. It doesn't mean that it applies to the gender in any way, shape or form. Like, witches hone their craft and they use it for other purposes, medicinal, growing, whereas wizards, I imagine, are much more scholarly, and they would study a lot more, and it's more the scientific point of view. Some people may disagree with me there, but that's kind of how I've built the world. So after I've put on my alcohol markers, I like to build up texture, and the best way to build up texture, especially with the alcohol markers, is to use either pencil crayons on top or watercolor. This creates a really beautiful effect on top of your markers and gives that marker a little bit of texture that you would not be able to achieve with the marker alone. Yes, you can achieve some beautiful textures with alcohol markers, but sometimes the color's just a little bit flat. So by using the pencil crayons here, which I'm using the Polychromos and Prismacolor, I use a mixture of them because I like them both for particular reasons. But like by texturing and layering them on top, I'm able to achieve something that I'm not able to achieve with alcohol markers alone. It just adds that extra tooth of texture to a piece that really helps it stand out, that I would not have been able to achieve with alcohol markers alone. I personally really like this technique. If you're using watercolors, it does add another complete effect with alcohol markers. Now, if you are want to use alcohol markers with watercolors, my suggestion always is to apply the alcohol marker first and then put watercolor on top. This is because when you put watercolor down and then try to put the marker on top of it, because you've already put the watercolor down, the paper is already coated and the alcohol marker doesn't have much to grip to, and because it doesn't have a lot to grip to, the color doesn't settle as well, and you can create a faded effect. Now if you're after that effect, lovely, to completely do it, but always make sure your watercolor is dry before applying alcohol marker on top. You will ruin your markers this way. And just to finish off this piece, what I do is I add a little bit of white gel pen just to make certain areas pop. You'll notice I've used it particularly on the glowing flower, on certain areas where I would want them to stand out, like the spines on the cacti, like the little succulents down at the bottom here. I've used it on the little cat rat. I don't know, I like this little green fellow. What should we call him? I don't know why he's a him. I don't know. I like this idea of like she has this little spiky rat who like crawls in between the cacti, helping her pick out the flowers to be the perfect for whispering little spells to and giving them good luck charms. So this is actually what the finalized book looks like. As you can see, the way I've done this coloring book is it has the illustration on one side, and on the back it has a description of that illustration. This is so if you are using alcohol markers, and because alcohol markers behave the way that they do, if it bleeds through the paper, you're not destroying another illustration on the back. That is one of my pet peeves when it comes to coloring books, because hey, what if you want to use both pieces? And it's also a way that if you wanted to take the page out and you wanted to say display it would always have the description of that character. This was really fun to do. I got to create alternative characters for the Plant Witch universe. I had a lot of fun studying all the different types of animals and plants. It made me learn a lot, and it's honestly one of the best things that I've done in a while. I love doing line work. It is one of my all-time favorite things to do. I just love like the detail that I can get with it. Color can add a lot, but there's something about line work that I just absolutely adore. So just giving you a few flick through of everything. I know you've seen all these illustrations, but they look so different in the book and they just all look so nice together. I'm really happy with it. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hopefully these colouring tips have been a little bit helpful for you. If you are interested in the book, I'll leave a link down below where you can grab a copy, physical copy only at the moment, I'm afraid. I am looking in the future to do digital copies. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment if you're new, maybe subscribe if you wish to see more content. But as always, folks, stay creative.